Welcome to FYI. My guest today is Congresswoman Betty McCollum from the 4th District of Minnesota, and she has been in Congress now for 18 years and just beloved by so many people, and it's easy to see why, and it's wonderful to have you here, if I may call you Betty.
You certainly may, and then I won't have to call you Mr. Barry ZeVAN, the weatherman.
Touche.
You know, as a kid, whoever would have thought I'd be on TV with you, so this is pretty exciting for me.
Well, thank you, my goodness. Now I'm speechless. I can't continue. Thank you so much. What an honor, what an honor. Thank you. We've talked about politics on this show often, but not directly with a congressperson. Former Vice President Mondale, bless his heart, was on the show in its early days, and we of course talked about politics, and one thing I asked him was, when he realized that he was one heartbeat away from being President of the United States, what went through his head? And he said, I was shocked. He said, it did hit me. He said, I was shocked. And to realize that, and he said, you just don't think about it too much. But for you to be in Congress for so many years, you certainly know how it works down there. The fact, and not to monopolize this for right now, but to lead in, I wanted to say my years in DC, I got to know a lot of Congress people, senators, and so forth. The staffers, as you know, and the audience should know, anybody who thinks that people in Congress aren't working, a lot of these staffers work 16 hours a day. And you work 16 hours a day sometimes. And it's just, people should know it's just not some kind of a fun ride down there. Whatever motivated you to get into politics?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for recognizing how hard our staff does work. And you know, I was one of the few offices that was paying interns. And now we passed a rule in the U.S. Congress. Both the Senate and the House are going to start paying their interns because they come in and work really hard for us too. And there's, if you're interning out in Washington, D.C. and you're from a congressional district and you're supporting yourself or your family's helping you out going through college, it's a very expensive city to live in. So we do a stipend for our interns to acknowledge the fact how hard they do work. No one does this job alone. You can't be an expert on anything, so you really do rely and try to surround yourself with really good people, plus you have the Library of Congress, right, the best library in the world to back you up for information. So I didn't think, you know, I didn't set on a career path to serve in Washington, D.C. I didn't even set on a career path to serve on the North St. Paul City Council. Just grew up in a family that was really interested in politics. Father who's a Irish Catholic Democrat, and a mother who was a independent Norwegian Republican. And they're both well-read, both had different philosophies and different religions on, you know, but they shared a common value. You know, respecting one another, making sure that their kids had every opportunity, making sure that they contributed to a community, that everybody felt safe and successful. So when the opportunity kind of came to petition my North St. Paul City Council to make sure that the playground equipment was in as good a shape as the hockey boards were, after a couple kids had been injured, including my daughter, on some playground equipment, I decided that, you know, I needed to raise up my hand and contribute back to my community. And little did I know that I would land up one day serving in Congress. But those things that you do throughout your life, right? They can open doors, and then if the doors open and you decide to step through it, you can. So I owe it to a good public education and good, you know, family that was very curious about the world and taught me to be respectful of other people's opinions, but try to get the job done and move forward.
What do we need that philosophy today?
We do. You know, I was talking about with my staff over in the car. You know, sometimes I'll have somebody kind of, you know, write something, or I'll think something. You'll be angry about a vote that happened or a speech that somebody made, and you know, it's if I'm going to sign my name to something, how would I feel if my children would read it? How would I feel if my grandmother was to read it? Would they say that I was being respectful and treating someone with dignity and respect, at the same time standing up for my rights and my beliefs? And so I think we need a lot more of that right now. And you know, as we're taping this, the FBI and the New York Police Department and all the terrorism task force working together think they have the suspect who sent the bombs through the mail. And civil discourse needs to come back. It needs to be fashionable, rather than the bullying, the taunting, and the name calling. And you know, people on both sides of the aisle are guilty of that at times, and it's spilled over into just the way people even, you know, talk to each other at a grocery store and that. And it's not the world I want to live in, where people aren't kind to one another.
Amen to that. Yeah, I have referenced this a couple times way in the past. We've had moments when, say, a president would, even during a campaign, would make fun of the other person or something. But that was only one time or two times. And my best example is it lost Thomas Dewey the election in 1948 to President Truman, who, as you know, I had the pleasure to interview him a long time ago. But anyway, Truman described Dewey as the fellow you'd see on top of the little guy you saw on top of the wedding cake. Oh. And when people looked at these little figurines, gee whiz, he really looks like that.
He does look like that.
And so that kind of destroyed Tom Dewey, who actually had a pretty good reputation as a trust buster and some really good stuff he did in New York State. But so when you dive into this for the first time, butterflies?
I still get butterflies.
Really?
Walking over, you know, there's every you know, voting for a post office is not the same as voting to go to war. So I don't get butterflies when I'm voting on naming post offices, but I was elected in 2000, and you know, never in my life did I ever think I would ever be casting a vote whether or not to go to war. And I had that opportunity in front of me twice, once for the Iraq War, which, looking back at now, we should have, when we wrote that war resolution, we should have put some tighter constraints on it, because now, what, 17 years, 18, going on 18 years, we could be still at war, one of the longest wars that the United States has you know, been involved in, right? And then the Iraq War, which I didn't vote for, but those are pretty heady decisions that you get called on, because those have life and death consequences. But so does voting for a health care bill. When I voted for the Affordable Care Act, I knew it wasn't perfect, but I had been with so many people and constituents who either couldn't afford health insurance, had been locked out of health insurance because of pre-existing conditions, or families that had gone bankrupt trying to make sure that their children had cancer treatment. So I knew we needed to do something. But you know, those are decisions that if you're not taking very seriously, you shouldn't be there, because they're life-changing and very impactful for the people that you're voting on for.
Does it increase the caring that you have for your constituents? Because after a number of years, a lot of people say, oh, well, here we go to work again today, or whatever. Does it increase with each year the number of issues you have to address, and the fact that this is really serious business? I mean, you knew it was serious when you got into it, but does that seriousness really take even more hold?
Well, so I'm 64, and I got elected to serve on the city council in North St. Paul in my late 30s, and then I served 8 years in the Minnesota House as a part-time legislature. And on the city council, it's nonpartisan in North St. Paul. And when I first ran for that office, it was, oh my God, a Democrat's running, and I was active in the party, and they were afraid that I would bring that to the council. They found out I didn't, and I was very honored to have Mayor Sandberg, who was a Republican when I ran for Congress, actually endorse and support me when I ran for Congress, because he knew I would work to solve problems. And I've really seen the change even in the Minnesota House. It used to be people voted by region. The East Metro would make sure, our roads and bridges, we'd kind of be together, not as Democrats or as Republicans, but as people representing the East Metro. Same thing would happen in Minneapolis and the West Metro. But then we would come together, right, to make sure that we had the trunk highway system moving throughout the whole state, well and operated. And those weren't partisan issues. They would be local issues. All local politics is local, as Speaker Tip O'Neill said. And I'm watching that just really, really break down. When I first got elected in '92 was the Year of the Women. And so the Republican women, Kathleen Blatz was serving in the House then, and Peggy Leppick, and Sydney was there from the Minnetonka area, and we worked together to do some public awareness on osteoporosis and some women's health issues that were before us, but also to look at the economic status of women, because we knew so many of our grandparents, aunts and uncles, in some cases our mothers in particularly, because they had been full-time moms, right? Were retiring in near poverty. What could we do to make sure that that wasn't going to happen to the next generation of women? And those opportunities to work together are harder and harder to find, because I hope it doesn't change in my party, but I've experienced it with Republicans, especially in Washington. If you're seen too much as looking like you're cozying up to Democrats rather than working to solve problems, they get challenged with a primary from someone from the extreme right.
Wow. Things, the new normal, as they say, is sometimes not so wonderful. A lot of times. How does a person split the time between their home district and DC? I mean, obviously you have to live during the week in DC, so that must be a real challenge.
Well, I remember when I was first door knocking for city council, I had my daughter in the stroller. We were out door knocking one afternoon, and somebody said, well, who's going to watch your little kid when you're at the council meeting? I said, well, I have a very capable husband at home that's really great at spending real good quality time with his children. That was, a commitment, a time commitment that I made, and I realized you had to kind of keep a balance. Then when I was in the State House, I started missing Swimmington meets and things like that, because we'd have late night votes. So to kind of get to answer your question, I've watched young families in Washington really struggle with balancing their time. When I got to Washington, my children were in college. But still making sure when I'm home on the weekends, because I'm home most every weekend, my daughter and I was just texting her about getting together tonight. You make sure you have time to do that, and see friends and spend times with family, because if you allow yourself to be in a mindset of working on Washington issues all the time, you'll miss out on what's going on in life all around you that you should be paying attention to in order to cast thoughtful votes. So the challenge is in Washington, I don't have much free time. I maybe get home at 8 o'clock at night. I'm up at 6 in the morning. There's lots of reading to do, lots of work to do, so that when I'm home on the weekends or we're here doing the district work period, when I have those opportunities to be with friends, to go out, walk a dog with a friend early in the morning before we both go to work, we try to do that. You need to bring balance to your life, but I have to work at it. I'll be honest about it. I really have to work on it.
Wow, what a mind bender that is. Friends of mine who were in government said Potomac fever was the worst kind of fever to catch, because once you're inside the Beltway, it's almost like a black hole. The energy sucks everything out of everything else, and as you say, it's very difficult to maintain some sort of normalcy. You know, do you practice every day and say, okay, today I'm going to be thinking of something else?
Well, you know, there's always a kitchen sink to scrub, dusting and vacuuming. I clean. I have two very small homes that I take care of myself, and it's nice to see accomplished work done at the end of the day. So when the laundry's done and it's folded and I put it away, it's like I accomplished something from beginning to end, because things in Washington, projects, whether it's working on the Green Line or when we were working on developing the Union Depot station in St. Paul, some of those projects can take, you know, 6, 12 years to see from beginning to end. So you have to remind yourself, one, to be patient, but two, to keep focused on the task ahead of you. Learn how to walk and chew gum, I guess, is the old phrase. Do both.
There's been so much news coverage regarding females running for offices this year especially. Is that encouraging to you as a woman to say, hey, wait a minute, it's about time women started to get more noticed? What's your thinking about that?
You know, so I mentioned when I was the State House in 1992 was the Year of the Woman, and we had a large women's class, and there were a lot of women serving at the time, prospectively on the Republican side of the aisle in Minnesota. There are a few, and then we watched the numbers go down. The Senate's increased its numbers a little bit. On my side of the aisle, we've increased the numbers of women working. There's over 60 of us elected on the Democratic side, 23, 24, depending upon if there's a seat that's open and not on the Republican side. So we're still not there yet with equity in having voices heard. And so I was the second woman elected since statehood when I was elected in 2000. And I remember Congressman Sabo and Oberstar when after Bruce Vento, whose seat I have, passed away, and we were sitting around talking, and they said it's nice to have a sister at the table because, you know, women do bring a different perspective because we've had different life experiences. So if you want to talk about pay equity, or you talk about health care, or even you know, job opportunities, job training, women have different experiences and different expectations for what they would like to see happen with some of the programmatic changes that federal government can be responsible in their actions. You can create more opportunity. And so I've had different experiences than the men in the delegation. So it's been nice, and it looks like we could, for sure right now, it looks like the 5th District will be represented by a woman for the first time in history of the state of Minnesota with Ilhan, and the Republican woman who's running for that is also running. And I think Angie Craig, that the polling is reflective. We'll find out election night. We could have 3 women serving from our delegation and 2 women senators.
Wow.
I mean, just think about that.
That's great.
Pretty amazing for Minnesota, but then we're pretty above average here.
So the wonderful politicians who have come out of here on both sides, on the male side and the female side.
Oh, Jim Ramstad was wonderful when I got elected to Congress. He was someone on education issues and a lot of other things that I worked on.
Yeah.
Was a real good mentor.
Eugene McCarthy was one of my tennis partners in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah?
So he and the secretary to the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was quite a combination there. But no, it's in regard to female leaders, women leaders. We've had, of course, Angela Merkel, who is still in Germany, but and also the Iron Lady in the UK.
Oh yeah,
Margaret Thatcher.
Right.
And not being solicitous here, but in my opinion, and I think a lot of men share this thought, when women take the reins, I really think that things do start moving in quite a direction. I was producing I do this occasionally, little sidebars here, but anyway, I produced one of my documentaries about 3 years ago, and Heidi Heitkamp was,
Okay.
she had just been elected from North Dakota, and they found her to be really powerful. She energized the room. I mean,
There's a presence when she walks in. You're so right.
absolutely, and so I'm thinking to myself, hey, hey guys, wake up, wake up a little bit.
Well, I've noticed that I've had opportunities to travel internationally since being elected to Congress, and I've worked on a lot of reconciliation issues, both in Northern Ireland, and then I've been in Congo, DRC, where women were used as instruments of war, with the rape and some of the brutality to them. But the women that I met were empowered to do what they could to bring an end to the conflict. They didn't want to keep the conflict going. They wanted to make sure that their kids could live with peace and security. I meet women in Africa that, work so hard to make sure that their children have an education. And so I've been trying to get more women involved, not only here in the United States, but to step up. But every peace process that I've watched happen behind the scenes, it is the mothers who have come together and said, no more of my sons will be fighting this war. No more of my daughters will be victims of war. This needs to stop. And it's quite often the women that really force the peace through, and then work towards a reconciliation so that a country, a family, or community can start to heal.
What are the most pressing issues right now, in your opinion?
I think getting health care right so people feel that they can take a deep breath, that we're not going in this cycle about, is the pre-existing condition that my child was born with, a heart defect, is that going to be something that they're going to be struggling with economically and worried about, while we're responsible for them when they go off and have start their own family or start their own career. And then if we can get our energy independence, really start, especially you look at the state of Minnesota with what we've done with wind and solar, and fossil fuels are going to be part of the mix, in my lifetime and in my children's lifetime. They're not going to, be taken off the grid anytime soon. But if we can figure out how to be the innovators and the creators in the battery and the technology story, and the reducing and recycling of products, we will continue to be the leader of the marketplace in the world. And that's what America's kind of done from its founding with its great inventions and its great step forward. So I think our economic future could be really bright if we're willing to reignite that Sputnik dream, right? We weren't going to let the Russians beat us in space. We need to have the same thing happening with technology. And we will also find ourselves helping our planet out with global warming at the same time. So I'm hopeful about those things, but I think for a lot of families, healthcare is a huge issue, and economic burden. What's our economy going to be like in the future for future generations? And that means that the United States comes together to say, what are the next great inventions? What are the next great ideas? And how can the United States be a leader in that? Because if we are, the economy will come along right along with it.
You mentioned the international travel. Do you ever seek advice from some leaders overseas?
Well, I've worked with a group of parliamentarians that were going around looking at international programs through the World Bank. And it was a group of people from the UK, France, Germany, Finland. And I was the chair of it for a short while. But when we went into countries, this was during the height of the AIDS crisis, when we would go to Ethiopia or Somalia or South Africa, we would sit down and talk to the other leaders and say, okay, we're here to help, but you have to come up with a sustainable community solution on how this is going to move forward. But we had to look at some of the projects that we were doing with a very critical eye, and just not say, oh look, we put money into this water treatment facility and then walked away from it and said problem solved. But the water treatment program that we might have not had any chance of sustainability the first time it broke down. in a rural community. So there are ways in which, you know, I continue to reach out to those folks and speak with them, and especially working on some the peace solutions that we were trying to during the height of the Sudanese war, when that was going on in Darfur. Right now, I'm very concerned about what is happening in Yemen, the number of children that are literally starving to death that no one knows about, and it's because we can't get the powers to be to put their guns down and sit and talk to each other, and in the meantime do something about children that are literally starving to death. And it's nations fighting, not families fighting. And families, their children are the victims.
That's horrendous. Pardon my ignorance, on what committee do you serve?
So I'm on the Appropriations Committee because I learned a long time ago you can have great ideas, but if you don't have the money to fund them with, or if you think there is money that can be more effectively used or returned back to the taxpayer's dollar, that's where you can do the greatest oversight, is on the Appropriations Committee, the Money Committee. And that's divided into subcommittees. So if we take back the House this November, I will become, instead of the ranking member, the chair of the Interior Committee, which oversees our national parks, all our public lands, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that's got a pretty big portfolio, and I'm very excited about working on that. And then I'm number 2 on defense. I'm known as the fighting dove on the committee. I think we should have a strong defense, but we shouldn't be wasting money in the Defense Committee too. So I look at it with a very sharp eye.
Those are powerful, powerful committees. I've had the pleasure to, one of my documentaries was for the Indian Land Tenure Foundation in Little Canada, and we shot in 14 states and DC. John McCain was actually one of our the interviewees, and
yeah,
Tom,
a lot of tribes in Arizona.
And Tom Daschle, when he was
Dakota.
still in Congress. Sam Donaldson was the host, and he's hosted 3 of my documentaries. We've done 3 about American Indians, and their plight has certainly just been still awful, in my opinion. And what we discovered then was that there was one member of Congress from Massachusetts, I think Henry Dawes was his name, he formed the Dawes Act to literally eradicate the American Indian. And so gladly that did not happen, but they still have a lot of.
They have a lot to do, but some of our tribes here that have been very blessed, Shakopee and Mille Lacs, the philanthropic work that they do for Indian tribes all across the country, as well as the work that they do right here in the state of Minnesota, is pretty amazing and sometimes goes unnoticed. But there are so many tribes in Pine Ridge and that don't have the opportunities and that, and so working to create those opportunities is something that we need to do, honor our treaties.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time during this busy pre-election time, and wish you the very best of luck. And what a joy to be able to talk to you on the show.
Well, nice being with you on TV.
Thank you, ma'am. And now, shameless plug time.
Absolutely.
Yes, Betty actually has a copy of this book, which she has now read 14 times. No. Maybe it's 14 words.
The cover.
The cover, yes. It's on Amazon. I hope you explore it. There are a lot of surprises. Again, thanks to Betty McCollum. See you later.